Gilles Deleuze is one of the most important contemporary philosophers, and he interests me a tremendous amount, but it's often very difficult to understand him because of the tremendous multifarious influences upon his work. And one of the influences that I've come upon in the last few months and have only belatedly realized is so influential to him is William Burroughs. William Burroughs was a member of the Beat Generation and has a tremendously exciting and almost uncomfortable style at times, which had a lot of influence upon the way Burroughs approaches philosophy as an artistic endeavor. As only a cursory study of this, in this lecture, I would like to chart the similarities between their thoughts between Deleuze's work Negotiations, which is a tremendous kind of intro work to Deleuze, featuring a number of interviews with Deleuze and Guattari, and the oeuvre of William Burroughs. As a cursory quote here, Deleuze states, Felix sees writing as a schizoid flow drawing in all sorts of things. I'm interested in the way a page of writing flies off in all directions and at the same time closes right up on itself like an egg. And in the reticences, the resonances, the lurches, and all the larvae you can find in a book. Rarely have we found such an adequate and apt articulation of the philosophy of William Burroughs and the way that he approaches writing. And I think Burroughs really did as an artist what Deleuze wanted to do as a philosopher. In his essay Mediators, he says, what we should do, in fact, is stop allowing philosophers to reflect on things. The philosopher creates, he doesn't reflect. You have to construct intellectually mobile concepts. Just as it's not enough to make moving shadows on the wall, you have to construct images that can move by themselves. And in fact, this auto-production of writing and of thought was really important for Deleuze, and the creative impulses latent within society was one of the chief objects of the philosopher. He says that we have to see creation as tracing a path between impossibilities, that creation takes place in bottlenecks, and that a new syntax is a foreign language within a language. A creator who isn't grabbed around the throat by a set of impossibilities is no creator. A creator is someone who creates their own impossibilities and thereby creates impossibilities. You have to work on the wall because without a set of impossibilities, you wouldn't have the lines of flight, the exit that is creation, the power of falsity that is truth. Your writing has to be liquid or gaseous, simply because normal perception and opinion are solid, geometric. Not becoming unearthly, but becoming all the more earthly by inventing laws of liquids and gases on which the earth depends. So style requires a lot of silence and work to make a whirlpool at some point, then flies out like the matches children follow along the water in a gutter. Because you don't get a style just by putting words together, combining phrases, using ideas. You have to open up words, break things open to free Earth's vectors. All writers, all creators are shadows. And indeed, this shadow presence is something we find across Burroughs. For one thing, because of the way that we only get traces of Burroughs the man in his writing. As a very famous author, he was well versed in the way in which the artist is a commodifiable image for the public, and the ways in which this is transferred into one's writings. But in fact, despite this distance between the man and the author, the real material person and the commodified specular image, Burroughs was always aware, as was Deleuze, of the embodied nature of thinking, that thinking itself is a body and that it is lived through and articulated in and by bodies. For Deleuze, even questions are ways of acting and producing. As such, everyday language is not a pure reproductive model of codes, as much as language proper would like us to think it is for the sake of specificity and efficiency. Rather, on the micro or molecular level, everyday language is a series of divergences and violations of homogeneous authorities of control. Everyday language is exactly the kind of language that Burroughs seeks to infuse in his work, especially his cut-up work, where he takes various items and images from daily life and cuts them into his work in a way that seeks to subvert the primacy of authorial intention in the production of an artistic creation. Therefore, Burroughs's philosophy is very similar to that of Deleuze, who says that being itself is political, and we might add revolutionary. Burroughs's project is therefore an attempt to rewrite language in much the same way Deleuze and Guattari attempt to re-theorize linguistics as a series of linguistic minorities constantly being evoked. Every utterance is, for Deleuze, ontologically singular, a singularity, not as a unique essence, but rather as a hexeity. Deleuze writes, a draft, a wind, a day, a time of day, a stream, a place, a battle, an illness, all have a non-personal individuality. They have proper names. We call them hexeties. They combine like two streams, two rivers. They express themselves in language, carving differences in it. But language gives each its own individual life and gets things passing between them. Even if you speak like most people on the level of opinions, you say, me, I'm a person, just as you say, the sun's rising. But we're not convinced that's definitely the right concept. Felix and I, and many others like us, don't feel we're persons exactly. Our individuality is rather that of events, which isn't making any grand claim, given that hexeties can be modest and microscopic. I've tried in all my books to discover the nature of events. It's a philosophical concept, the only one capable of ousting the verb to be and attributes. Deleuze's philosophy is therefore constantly on the verge of bursting into purely aphilosophical realms of affect, reminiscent of Artaud. And there's an ever-present desire of escape in Deleuze, not as a strategy of egoistic, solipsistic collapse, but rather from a deeply artistic desire to create on the level of the cosmic, unfettered by the pettiness of human social structures or linguistic demands. And we can in fact trace such a line of escape all the way from Artaud to Burroughs to Deleuze. In Artaud's 1947 radio play, To Have Done with the Judgment of God, he articulates such a sense of aesthetic grasping for the reins of the cosmic, stating, I mean that I have found the way to put an end to this ape once and for all, and that although nobody believes in God anymore, everybody believes more and more in man. So it is man whom we must now make up our minds to emasculate. How's that? How's that? No matter how one takes it, you are mad, ready for the straitjacket. By placing him again for the last time on the autopsy table to remake his anatomy, I say to remake his anatomy. Man is sick because he is badly constructed. We must make up our minds to strip him bare in order to scrape off the animalcule that itches him mortally, God, and with God his organs. For you can tie me up if you wish, but there is nothing more useless than an organ. When you have made him a body without organs, then you will have delivered him from all his automatic reactions and restored him to his true freedom. Then you will teach him again to dance wrong side out, as in the frenzy of dance halls, and this wrong side out will be his real place. This passage informs Burroughs' understanding of the word, of language itself, as an organism, as not simply an abstract thing, viz., a series of codes whose adherence is the result of Foucault's disciplinary societies via schooling, but also that word is in the literal, material sense of language as a body invading and occupying the space of the page and transmitted to the reader via thought. In William Burroughs' The Ticket That Exploded, in the subsection Operation Rewrite, he states, "The other half is the word. The other half is an organism. Word is an organism. The presence of the other half, a separate organism attached to your nervous system on an error line of words, can now be demonstrated experimentally. From symbiosis to parasitism is a short step. The word is now a virus. The word may once have been a healthy neural cell. In it now a parasitic organism that invades and damages the central nervous system. Modern man has lost the option of silence. Try halting your subvocal speech. Try to achieve even 10 seconds of inner silence. You will encounter a resisting organism that forces you to talk. That organism is the word. In the beginning was the word. In the beginning of what exactly? Perhaps the word itself is recent, about 10,000 years old. What we call history is the history of the word. In the beginning of that history was the word." Here's Burroughs to further elaborate on this viral function, as well as this elusive other half, in his essay, 10 Years and $1 Billion, from his essay collection, The Adding Machine. He says, "My general theory since 1971 has been that the word is literally a virus, and that it has not been recognized as such because it has achieved a state of relatively stable symbiosis with its human host. That is to say, the word virus, the other half, has established itself so firmly as an accepted part of the human organism that it can now sneer at gangster viruses like smallpox and turn them into the Pasteur Institute. But the word clearly bears the single identifying feature of virus. It is an organism with no internal function other than to replicate itself." This sense of viral contamination by language and its normative demands is directly articulated by Deleuze in his essay Mediators. We're riddled with pointless talk, insane quantities of words and images. Stupidity's never blind or mute. So it's not a problem of getting people to express themselves, but of providing little gaps of solitude and silence in which they might eventually find something to say. Repressive forces don't stop people expressing themselves, but rather force them to express themselves. What a relief to have nothing to say, the right to say nothing, because only then is there a chance of framing the rare and ever rarer thing that might be worth saying. Later, in an interview entitled Control and Becoming, he articulates a highly Burroughsian statement of a similar nature. Maybe speech and communication have been corrupted. They're thoroughly permeated by money, and not by accident, but by their very nature. We've got to hijack speech. Creating has always been something different from communicating. The key thing may be to create vacuoles of non-communication, circuit breakers, so we can elude control. Such sentiments, when translated into Burroughs, might go something like this, and this is from The Soft Machine. "We fold writers of all time in together and record radio programs, movie soundtracks, TV and jukebox songs, all the words of the world stirring around in a cement mixer, and pour in the resistance message. Calling partisans of all nation, cut word lines, shift linguals, free doorways, vibrate tourists, word falling, photo falling, break through in gray room." We can see here how closely Deleuze and Burroughs' aesthetics converge and agree with one another. In fact, some of Deleuze's statements in his interview On Philosophy show marked influence from Burroughs's cut-up philosophy. He says that I see philosophy as a logic of multiplicity, that concepts are composites, amalgams of lines and curves. If new concepts have to be brought in all the time, it's just because the plane of immanence has to be constructed area by area, constructed locally, going from one point to the next. A concept's power comes from the way it's repeated as one area links up with another, and this linkage is an essential, ceaseless activity, the world as a patchwork. And the notion of a patchwork is markedly similar to Burroughs's idea of the world, the author, and language as a cut-up. As such, the cumulative state and stakes of thinking and writing achieve a common understanding between Artaud, Burroughs, and Deleuze as a bodily creative project demanding more than abstract pondering. Instead, it is firstly pragmatic. Deleuze says, philosophy is no more communicative than it's contemplative or reflective. It is by nature creative or even revolutionary because it's always creating new concepts. The only constraint is that these should have a necessity as well as an unfamiliarity, and they have both to the extent they're a response to real problems. Concepts are what stops thought being a mere opinion, a view, an exchange of views, gossip. Any concept is bound to be a paradox. Secondly, thought should be risky. Deleuze's description of Foucault, in fact, could equally apply to Artaud, Burroughs, and Deleuze himself. There's a violence in Foucault, an intense violence, mastered, controlled, and turned into courage. He saw what was intolerable in things, and his style, at least up to the last books that attain a kind of serenity, is like a lash. It's a whip, twisting and relaxing. Foucault always evokes the dust or murmur of battle, and he saw thought itself as a sort of war machine. Because once one steps outside what's been thought before, once one ventures outside what's familiar and reassuring, once one has to invent new concepts for unknown lands, then methods and moral systems break down and thinking becomes, as Foucault put it, a perilous act, a violence whose first victim is oneself. Deleuze understands all subjectivity as intersected and shot through by lines of flight. The subject and other such molar abstractions do not exist for Deleuze, at least not in the absolute objective way one has been led to believe in the history of philosophy and society. He states in his essay On Philosophy that abstractions explain nothing. They themselves have to be explained. There are no such things as universal. There's nothing transcendent, no unity, subject or object, reason. There are only processes, sometimes unifying, subjectifying, rationalizing, but just processes all the same. These processes are at work in concrete multiplicities. Multiplicity is the real element in which things happen. It's multiplicities that fill the field of immanence, rather as tribes fill the desert without it ceasing to be a desert. And the plane of immanence has to be constructed. Immanence is constructivism. Any given multiplicity is like one area of the plane. All processes take place on the plane of immanence and within a given multiplicity. So instead, when one undercuts such abstractions and molecularizes one's gaze, one finds a floating, liminal, fluxy subject beneath. Deleuze states, there are still subjects, of course, but they're specks dancing in the dust of the visible and permutations in an anonymous babble. The subject's always something derivative. It comes into being and vanishes in the fabric of what one says, what one sees. We find the equivalent of such a subject in Burroughs's The Soft Machine when he writes, they live in translucent jelly and converse in light flashes, liquefying bones of the world and eating the jelly. Boy chrysalis rotting in the sun, lazy undersea eyes on the nod over the rotting meat vegetable sleep, limestone dope out of shale and water. Now, by now, one could have surmised that a natural pathway between the work of Deleuze and Burroughs would be the theory on control, articulated in Deleuze's oft-cited postscript on control societies, which, among its various Burroughsian statements, plainly cites Burroughs as the theorist of control from which Deleuze found the inspiration for control societies. He states, "Control societies are taking over from disciplinary societies. Control is the name proposed by Burroughs to characterize the new monster, and Foucault saw it fast approaching." And now, in control societies, there are modulations, he says, like a self-transmuting molding continually changing from one moment to the next, or like a sieve whose mesh varies from one point to another. He says that control man undulates, moving among a continuous range of differing orbits, and that the technology that exemplifies these control societies are information technology and computers, where the passive danger is noise and the active, piracy and viral contamination. And that's an extremely Burroughsian notion. The passive danger of, for example, not contributing to and participating in society is being absorbed by the noise of the ground state of society, whereas the active is being taken over and controlled by the viral contamination of language, of markets, of open circuits, as Deleuze puts it. Therefore, this has nothing to do with any progress towards individualizing treatment, but is a substitution for individual or numbered bodies of coded individual matter to be controlled. And this idea of an infecting individual matter is put very famously in one of Burroughs' oft-cited passages from Naked Lunch, which is the talking asshole section, in which we see such a state of viral contamination. And I'd like to read for you this passage, which is a few pages, but which very expertly connects to the control societies theorized by Deleuze. Did I ever tell you about the man who taught his asshole to talk? His whole abdomen would move up and down, you dig, farting out the words. It was unlike anything I ever heard. This ass talk had a sort of gut frequency. It hit you right down there like you gotta go. You know when the old colon gives you the elbow and it feels sort of cold inside, and you know all you have to do is turn loose? Well, this talking hit you right down there. A bubbly, thick, stagnant sound. A sound you could smell. This man worked for a carnival, you dig? And to start, it was like a novelty ventriloquist act. Real funny, too, at first. He had a number he called the Better Ol' that was a scream, I tell you. I forget most of it, but it was clever, like, "Oh, I say, are you still down there, old thing?" "Nah, I had to go relieve myself." After a while, the ass started talking on its own. He would go in and out, anything prepared, and his asshole would ad-lib and toss the gags back at him every time. Then it developed sort of teeth-like, little raspy, incurving hooks and started eating. He thought this was cute at first and built an act around it, but the asshole would eat its way through his pants and start talking on the street, shouting out it wanted equal rights. It would get drunk too and have crying gags. Nobody loved it, and it wanted to be kissed same as any other mouth. Finally, it started all the time, talking day and night. You could hear him from blocks screaming at it to shut up and beating at it with his fists and sticking candles up it. But nothing did any good, and the asshole said to him, "It's you who will shut up in the end, not me, because we don't need you around here anymore. I can talk and eat and shit." After that, he began waking up in the morning with a transparent jelly like a tadpole's tail all over his mouth. This jelly was what the scientists call UNDT, undifferentiated tissue, which can grow into any kind of flesh on the human body. He would tear it off his mouth and the pieces would stick to his hands like burning gasoline jelly and grow anywhere on him a glob off it fell. So finally his mouth sealed over and the whole head would have amputated spontaneous, except for the eyes, you dig? That's the one thing the asshole couldn't do was see. It needed the eyes. But nerve connections were blocked and infiltrated and atrophied, so the brain couldn't give orders anymore. It was trapped in the skull, sealed off. For a while, you could see the silent, helpless suffering of the brain behind the eyes. Then finally, the brain must have died, because the eyes went out and there was no more feeling in them than a crab's eye on the end of a stalk. The talking asshole scene traces a future of unfettered deterritorialization of the capitalist schizophrenic system. And I might note some clarification that's necessary here on the nature of schizophrenia that is done in an interview with Guattari on Anti-Oedipus, where Deleuze and Guattari say, "We're considering a very simple problem, like Burroughs with drugs. Can you harness the power of drugs without them taking over, without turning into a dazed zombie? It's the same with schizophrenia. We make a distinction between schizophrenia as a process and the way schizophrenics are produced as clinical states that need hospitalizing. It's almost the same thing in reverse. The schizophrenics in hospitals are people who've tried to do something and failed, cracked up. We are not saying revolutionaries are schizophrenics. We're saying there is a schizoid process of decoding and deterritorializing, which only revolutionary activity can stop turning into the production of schizophrenia. So we can see here that schizophrenia as a clinical entity is something that Deleuze and Guattari rail against. It is something which results when the egoistic consciousness must turn in on itself in the same way that the talking asshole turns in on its host. Therefore, deterritorialization in and of itself in Deleuze and Guattari's work is not simply good. Deterritorialization can in fact be bad. It's something that capitalism, for example, uses to penetrate into new markets, to take advantage of the third world, and establish new lines connecting capitalist markets across the globes in one collective network. Therefore, the talking asshole scene is an emblematic embodiment of control societies, with its constant development, streamlined to the point of cruelty and diffused throughout the whole of a territory qua viral strategy. The system, like capitalism, is trying to constantly escape its own limit, which is capital, just as the talking asshole is constantly facing and attempting to surpass its dependence upon the host. As such, I hope that this helps articulate the similarity between Deleuze and Burroughs' work. I think that Deleuze saw so much inspiration in Deleuze and really sought to be Burroughs in a way that he couldn't quite, but he also transforms Burroughs' theory into a philosophically rigorous manner that Burroughs wasn't yet prepared to do. That being said, I hope this lecture has been interesting and helped to synthesize these two brilliant thinkers together. Consider checking out any of my other work on postmodernism, German idealism, gender theory, postcolonial studies, and other literature. You can become a channel member for $5 a month and gain access to, among other things, a private philosophy Zoom, which you can tailor to your needs. I also have super thanks if you just like to make a one-time donation to the channel, because it helps me out so much to take some pressure off me whenever anyone donates, but no pressure. That's it for this lecture, and I'll see you in another one.